What's up everyone? We're going into more facts about the spawn. I did a full moon video yesterday and talked about some things. And I forget, man, I've done some of these videos before, but you know, some people haven't always seen them all. So a lot of people had a lot of good things in there. And I was glad to see that. I was shocked that I really didn't get as much pushback as I thought I was going to. I was really proud of some guys. Some guys started going, hey, you know what? I'm not really gonna go based off of what I've been told. Everything I saw and from the comments were people saying their experiences. And that's great. That's what I want people to do, is rely more on their experiences and less on what they've been told. But I heard a lot of great other comments, things that they thought were actually more important. And I agree with them. So if you're wondering about what some of those comments were, let's go over them. There's always exceptions to the rules. You're always going to be able to find at least one time where everything lines up and it is right. But so many times we find out that those times don't always add up. So in my experience, I'm going to kind of go over some things that I've noticed, okay? And where I think that the majority of the time, this is more the case. So in my opinion, the number one rule is this: the water tip usually has to reach a certain degrees. The reason it has to reach that degrees is bass know that their eggs won't fertilize and those fish won't become fry without a certain water temp. It just won't happen. Above everything else, they have to have the right water temp. Doesn't matter about a full moon. It doesn't matter about any of that stuff. The water temp has to be warm enough for the eggs to become fertilized and for the fry to grow. So that's number one. So I always believe that water temp's number one. Now, even when the water temp gets to a certain degree, I've still seen fish hold off. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. And what's crazy when that happens is I understand fish not doing it when the water hits 60. So right now down here in Texas, it's still February. It doesn't matter how warm it gets here in February. Yes, some bass will spawn, but bass know it's February. How? I know they don't have a calendar and they're not marking off the days, but I think the second is like the length of day. I do think they know that. I think they just know internally, like that they know that this is not March, it's not April. And I think they've been taught genetically wise, whatever it might be, that when it's still these length of days and it's still this time of the year, that there's a potential for really, really cold weather. So they might get some 80-degree days in here and get the water tip right up to 60. But the cold front comes through and knocks it down to 55, 54, 53. Those, right, it's not gonna produce their offspring. It's not gonna work. So they're gonna spawn for no reason. And I think those fish know that. So yes, some push up and some might be on beds, but we're talking very few. And I think some of those might not make it if something like this happens. So they know not to all go up. So I think as it gets closer to March for down here, they know that there's less likely of a cold front that's going to hurt them. And so they start to push a lot more. Now I have seen it one time. I'll never forget this because I rarely write stuff down, but we did win a boat. We won a boat on Rayburn, and it was March 23rd and 24th. It was a tournament, it was a championship where we had a day at Toledo Bend, and it just so happened it was gonna be in February. And the next day something happened. I can't remember, so they had to cancel the next day and they rebooked it in March. And we were like, oh my gosh. So it was one day on Toledo and one day on Rayburn. It was supposed to be back to back, but something happened. Well, anyways, all I remember is when we went out there in March, we were going to crush on them. We didn't get to practice. There was no practice for this event. So we just had to show up, and it was March 23rd. We're like, they're gonna all be on beds. It's warm, it's crazy. We get out there, none of them are on beds. I've never seen it to where they're not on beds in March 23rd on Rayburn, and the water temp was over 60 degrees. Now we crushed them. We just caught them on top waters and everything else like that. It was phenomenal. I think our first fish of the day was a 10-6 on a top water. It was crazy. But yeah, we only did that in the morning time because we didn't know, you know, we couldn't see. So we're like, hey, let's just fish around. And next thing you know, as throughout the day, we realized none of them were on beds, and we just kept catching them on top waters and swim jigs and stuff like that. It was great. But I was like, why would they not be on beds? It didn't make any sense to us. I still to this day can't explain why that was. Like I said, there's always exceptions. That's why I don't follow every rule, because I've been burned by it. We didn't get burned, we won the boat. But like I said, you can get burned by expecting something to happen because they tell you it's going to happen, right? They tell you that, hey, the rules are this, 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 they're gonna be on beds. So I still believe they're less likely to spawn if they know that the time of the year is not exactly perfect. They still might be on beds. Like I said, we saw some on beds. There's still fish on beds right now on all these lakes, just very few. So I think length of day matters. That's a close second. I still think water temp is number one, length of day. I think full moons can help. I think rising water, I think, helps them spawn more than falling water. Because one is, I think both of them can be detrimental though. They don't mind some rising water because I think they know this time of the year it rains and the water comes up, and a lot of times as that water comes up, it's pushing up into the woods, and eventually it'll stop raining and it starts to sustain. And they know when it sustains, that when they go spawn, it's going to usually stay at that water level for a while. Now this, don't get me wrong, you get places like Kentucky Lake and places that can fluctuate water 4 or 5 foot in a day. I don't know how they deal with that. I mean, that's not good. But for a lot of lakes, it rises and they do want to push. Falling water, I think, scares them more. And I think it scares them more because they go make a bed and all of a sudden that water drops down and their bed's on dry land, and they, once again, dropped their eggs, fertilized them, did all that stuff, and now their bed's on dry land. So they know that, so they got to compete with that. I think a lot of times they spawn deeper when the water's falling. And I think males make a lot more beds when the water's falling, and they just don't spawn. Like the females are like, no, I'm not going up there yet. Like, so it's a tricky battle. They got to figure it out. So that's why I think on a lot of lakes, when we talk about bad spawns, I think that's what it is. I think 99% of the time when we see classes of fish missing or a lake's not doing great, it's all because of the spawn. It's not because of fishing pressure or killing fish in tournaments or all that other stuff. To me, it's never that. It's always they had a bad spawn. Because remember, we might catch some fish in tournaments and some fish might die in tournaments and all these things, but we're talking about 0.0001% of fish. If the lake's falling or rising all through the spring and they never get a good spawn, it affects 100% of the fish, 100% of them. So there's a good chance that almost all of them have a bad spawn, and it's bad for the lake. So that's always number one in my opinion that can hurt a lake. But I think those 4 things are like what really affect the spawn. You know, what's crazy is down here is our fish spawn for a very long time, which I'm thankful for. Like, so they can start. I've seen them spawn in January, and I definitely see them spawn till May. Never seen one in June, not saying they don't, and maybe there's 100 that spawn in June, but for the most part May is when they kind of stop. So we get to spawn throughout the year. I think that's a Florida thing, a Florida strain bass thing. The further north I go, where you get into more just strictly largemouth strain bass, they don't have a lot of Florida strain, they all spawn a lot at the same time. Like, it's amazing. Like when they push, and I've been on some of these lakes, and I didn't know this until I started fishing, not the tour, but started traveling around a lot more. I would notice that these fish push, and it seemed like the whole lake pushes at once. It's crazy. Like, it's amazing how they'll push really, really quick. Our fish don't do that. I mean, we'll be up there catching fish on beds, and there'll be guys out there cranking them in 20-something foot of water. I actually did it last year where I stayed out deep, kind of with live scope, just to see. And I knew they were all on beds in March, and guys were catching them shallow, and I was out there still catching them in 25 foot of water, like tons of them. It was insane. Not a lot of big ones, but there were still tons of fish out there. So I mean, and we've always seen it in tournaments where you see guys catching them in a lot of different ways, and you still see guys bringing in fish in April that are just blowed out, and they talked about catching them in 20-something foot of water. So I mean, they're out there and they're waiting. So we have that luxury. I don't know if it's a luxury or a curse, because it's pretty cool. We can catch them a lot of different ways, but it also makes it very hard because they're always not up at the same time. You still got fish out deep. It's very hard to figure out what they're doing, because a lot of times that's where it's like you see these waves of fish. Those waves of fish always interest me, because I don't know why those waves of fish all of a sudden decide to move up. And that's kind of like that whole full moon argument, is the full moon makes them push. Well, sort of, but not really, because like I said, we see waves of fish pushing randomly in March. It has nothing to do with the full moon, and giant waves of fish push up for whatever reason. And we might see it for 2 or 3 days, and then all of a sudden we stop seeing it. And we can only see that because we're out on the water maybe 6-7 days a week. And we got some lakes around here where we just go sight fish a bunch. And you go around the bank and you see the same kind of fish. You know, you see the same fish. Like you don't see any new fish, and all of a sudden the next day you go out there and there's 100 new fish. And the next day there's more and more. And then all of a sudden it stops. There's no new fish. And luckily we've had the opportunity to be out there for 6, 7, 8 days in a row to watch that. We've also seen the same fish on the same bed for 6, 7, 8 days in a row, guarding the same bed. Like, oh, yep, same fish is still here. So we've been able to see how long fish stay on beds. We've also been able, the one thing we don't know is this, how long a fish will actually stay on a bed. We've seen one when we're there, and we've seen how long it stays, but we've never actually known when it got there, right? It's very hard to be like, okay, that fish got there here and then left here, right? That's a hard one. We've seen one stay for a long time, but we never knew when that one got there, right? So that's where the full moon came into play of like, I don't really understand it, because I've seen these different waves of fish push up and then leave quickly too, and then they don't show up for a while. Everything's consistent. The weather's still consistent. It's right in the middle of March. It's 75 every single day, and yet you don't see those waves. So I've never understood, and I still to this day don't know why those waves push up when they do. Now, like I said, I see it more on the northern lakes. And then when I say northern lakes, north of like Texas, more or less northern strain bass, those fish seem to push up more all at once. I've been to, almost all of them. Almost all the lakes I've been to, I see them. Their spawning season is very quick compared to ours. Ours lasts for, I would say 2 months, like from the 1st of March to the end of April. It can be really, really good. Like a whole bunch of fish from that time. A little bit before, a little bit after, but those 2 months. Those other lakes, I see it more like where it's really good for a month. Like really good for a month. Now, I know they'll spawn longer, but really good for like that month. Like when it kicks off, it's like and it's usually later in the year, right? It's usually closer to April. And all of a sudden, like when it goes, they all go. It's like they've been waiting for so long, right? Whereas ours, we get these little pockets, these little windows of opportunities where you get a couple to kind of go up there. Like they're waiting and they're ready to push, and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm not waiting any longer. And they go in these little pockets. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure. I do think we have our spawning season lasts so much longer, and you get these different classes of fish. So we could have fish spawning in February and some spawning in May, and we get them, and at the end of the year, some are like, or at the end of 2 years, some are like 2 pounds, some are almost 3. Shoot, they almost had 4 or 5 months more of growing for them. We get different sizes of fish, but they still might be the same year class of fish. Because we always laugh about that when we see a lot of different sized fish throughout the year, like randomly. We'll see fish like this and then fish like this, and we're going, which one, when do they spawn? You know, what do they spawn this year or those last year fish? It's really, we've always laughed about that, trying to figure that out. Now, we get a lot of late spawners too that spawn really, really deep. A lot of times we don't know they're spawning like that. That's going to be interesting with live scope maybe, and some other things. Maybe we kind of get to see more of it. I still think it's hard though, because I do all this based on actually visually seeing them, like sight fishing. This isn't like I'm guessing that they're spawning, or I'm flipping up in a bush and I get bit and I'm like, I think that was on a bed. I don't view anything like that. Those are guesses. Now, they might be really, really good educated guesses, but none of that is how I view any of this. It's all by like literally me looking in the water and seeing it. If I don't see it, I don't really make comments on that. Because like I said, I think for years, we still guess. Now in muddy water, yeah, people have to guess. But like I said, I'm doing this over, we got a lot of lakes where we can see, and I just go sight fishing. So all this is based on me being able to look in the water. Can you see all over the lake, on every single lake? No. But over time, I've been able to see this go down, and it's just what I learned. It's always pretty cool. I really love doing it. I really love looking in the water. It's kind of why I like LiveScope too. It gives me a chance to look in the water because I love looking in the water so much. It's kind of the same thing. It's not the same thing, but it's as close as I've ever seen it. And that's one of my reasons I do like LiveScope. I'm able to look in the water, right? When I wasn't able to before. So either way, that's a little bit more of facts of the spawn, more like generalized ideas of what I think's kind of going on, right? They're not concrete, but they're as close to what I've seen as like that's kind of what goes down. The time of the year thing, it's crazy. I always look at that because I always used to look at look at it, it's a minute longer today and a minute longer tomorrow, and you look up and does 15, 20, 30 minutes really mean that much? I don't. It does. It has to. I think it's just that little bit more of sunlight. I think it's just, you know, God's way of showing them and them knowing in their environment that like this is what's going on. I think that's the easier way. I think that's why we'll never know. We just have to make as many educated guesses as possible of knowing what's going on and when it's going to happen. But I can tell you one thing. Keep on making those educated guesses, we're going to be wrong a lot of the times. I can promise you that we are wrong a lot of the times. I know we're doing the Bassmaster fantasy picks today, and they were talking about Fork, and they're like, oh, it's going to be a shallow event, and I'm like, no, it's not. And the only reason I say that is I know where we're at in the spawn down here, and we're nowhere. When I say we're nowhere close, we have very, very few fish, right, pushing up, and it's early in the morning and I'm in a t-shirt out here. It's warm down here. We also got a front coming in 2 days on Wednesday, right? Like I said, those fish know a front's coming through. I guarantee it. And it's going to get a little bit colder. But we are usually at least 2 weeks ahead of Fork. At least. Sometimes 3. It's just, I'm just telling you, I guarantee you their water tip hasn't hit 60 yet. And if it did, it just barely got there. But yeah, so much of our fish are out deep. So I just don't see Fork being a shallow water deal. It's gonna be a LiveScope deal. I hate to tell you all that. I don't know if y'all like that or not like that, but it's gonna be a LiveScope deal. LiveScope picks only for a week. All right, hope this helps, guys. See y'all.